So you have a topic here from daily life in ancient Israel called going to the bathroom in ancient Israel. And I think it's important because we take such things for granted. I remember hearing a talk once from Oprah, of all people, and she grew up in like some rural area. And when she came to the big city, I think it was Chicago, she saw a toilet and she couldn't imagine what it was for because it was in the house. She thought it was for washing your feet. And she said, I
Oh
knew it
my
wasn't for that
goodness.
other thing because it was in the house.
Oh my goodness.
So tell
Wow.
us about
Yeah.
bathrooms in ancient Israel.
Yeah. So when we were first, just some introduction.
Yeah.
I didn't set out to get my PhD to teach about going to the bathroom in ancient Israel. So how did this happen? So I'm teaching a class on daily life, and I wanted to make sure that every student is engaged. And I asked each of them, what's an aspect of life that you would be interested in learning about the Israelites? And so one of our friends, he said, going to the bathroom, and we all laughed. But then I thought, oh, it's a great topic, and it actually is. So going to the bathroom in ancient Israel, what's really interesting about it is that there's not a lot of talk about it in the biblical texts. In Deuteronomy 23:12, it says, "You shall have a designated area outside the military camp to which you shall go. With your utensils you shall have a trowel. When you relieve yourself outside, you shall dig a hole with it and then cover up your excrement." And this law about covering up the excrement is only about the military camp.
Right.
But you can kind of infer, if this is talking about the military camp that you have to be clean or covered, then you can also infer that would actually be the same in the towns. But what about like the larger cities like Jerusalem or Samaria? How and where do people go?
Yeah. Before you get to that, I want to say something about military camps. So they did a study after World War II, and they looked at the German military versus the British military, especially in North Africa, where they had a lot of records. And they found that the Germans were constantly sick with gastrointestinal diseases, let's call it that, and the British weren't. And they found out that the reason, when they investigated, was the British military manual had rules for digging a latrine. Every time, every night, a single night you set up camp, you dig a latrine. The Germans just, we're only here for one night. They walked out, they did their business, and then their groundwater got infected. And they were constantly sick, and this actually may have turned the tide of the war in North Africa, or certainly hurt the German military. Thank God, right? But so I mean, it's incredible.
Right.
Like here's a statement in Deuteronomy 23 from the biblical period, and we find in the 20th century this is still an issue, and even today in the 21st century, this is it's part of life. Is this situation?
Right.
So what
Part of
would
daily
they?
life.
So what would they do in a city when you're a 20-minute walk from the city walls? What would you do in ancient Jerusalem?
So we have to guess. We can't know for sure. We don't have a clear answer. So we can kind of guess based on other cities, as far back as 100 years ago, 200 years ago, or 1,000 years ago, what would people have done before modern plumbing? And so one option would be to, let's say, go to a city gate right outside. Another option would be there would be like a latrine area, right?
In the city.
In the city, other people might use a bucket and just throw it out the window, something like that.
Yeah.
So but we don't know what the Israelites did. But what's really interesting for me when I was studying this about going to the restroom is that just look at what I just said, going to the restroom, right? Like a euphemism, because it's so hard for humans to talk about this.
Even
and
today.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's the same thing in the Bible, because in the biblical texts, the going number 2, so to speak, is called Mesich et raglav. He covered his legs. That's what it's called. Lahasich et raglav. To cover.
And where do you see that?
We see that in a verse such as Judges 3:24, which says, "After Eglon had gone, the servants came. When they saw the doors of the roof chamber were locked, they thought, he must be covering his legs in the cool chamber."
And I remember learning this when I was in 4th grade, or I believe it was 4th grade. And we were told that he, it was very hot, and he would stick his feet in water to cool it off. Wow, what a connection!
No,
that's a connection to Oprah. I didn't even know that until you just said it. Wow.
Right. No, so what it meant was,
I'll be honest,
that
that's what I always thought it meant until just now. So I've just learned something. Wow.
Yeah,
wow,
and that's
wow.
and it's and the coolest thing about this euphemism, Nehemia, is that, like, I was calling it going to the restroom. They didn't have restrooms or actually Eglon may have had a restroom. That's
Yeah,
what
because
this
he was a
passage is
king.
suggesting.
Maybe he had a room there.
Right, maybe a king, something like that. But for most people, it wasn't like that. But the thing is that this difficulty of talking about it is also in the Bible, and then it's also in the interpreters of the Bible until this day. So let me give you an example. In many passages in the book of Kings and Samuel, they're talking about slaughtering male people. And in this context, the phrase comes up of not going number one, urination.
Yeah.
It's called mashtin bakir, somebody who would urinate on a wall. And that would be a man standing up against the wall. So in many times for example, what I like to say is in 1 Samuel 25:22, it says, God, do so to David and more also, if by morning I leave so much as one male of all who belong to him. And that's in the New Revised Standard Version. If I leave one person alive, that's going to be such a terrible thing. I'm not going to leave one male alive.
That's what it says
But if you look
in the New Revised.
English,
Okay, in the English. Okay.
right? Then you look at the King James, and the King James says, if I leave any that pisseth against the wall.
Okay.
Right, and so what we
and that's
see
what it
here
says
is
in
that
the Hebrew, right?
Yeah, it's what it says in
Okay.
Hebrew. What we see here is that in the New Revised Standard Version, it's also in the Jewish Publication Society and other Bibles, is that there's this difficulty of talking about it, and in the text itself, the translators of people's Bible who don't know Hebrew, they would miss that nuance. There's kind of a nuance there that says those who go urinate on a wall, it's kind of like almost slangish.
Yeah, it might actually refer to the younger people who hadn't learned to use the chamber pot, and possibly.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
The more interpretations, the better.
Yeah,
right.
In other words,
but
you've lost that possibility to distinguish those interpretations when you're told in the New Revised Standard Version that it's just every male, and it didn't even tell you what the literal phrase was. You've basically been they've taken that ability away from you to find out what the nuance there is.
Right, and I will say every single translation is right, and every single translation is wrong.
Okay, that's a great saying.
I can't make a better translation. I'm not criticizing them. I'm just saying we see what's going on here when we take a peek under the rug and we see the Hebrew. So that's what's going on.